How you doing?
Finally, it's happening.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, folks, we've it's been a while. We've brought this to fruition finally. And I say that finally to it's been a long time, but we finally brought all the mechanisms to play. Uh
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's
COVID, being a mom, my kids being home, me being home with them, devolving.
absolutely devolving. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, I love my kids, but it is really
Right.
hard for yeah.
Absolutely. And for my listeners who don't realize, there is a particular type of situation in Quebec right now, which is moronic, let's say moronic, to say the least. That's polite at that. You know, where do we begin, Terry?
Maybe not as moronic as policing people's language on Facebook posts during the pandemic when businesses are actually shut down.
Yeah. That's a huge concern there. That's a huge concern. I think that's not just a Canadian concern, but that's a huge concern internationally right now. How, of all things to police online, of all things you shouldn't police online, certainly is the how people are communicating and how people are discussing and certainly disseminating information. It's very eerie. And that actually is a good currently with what's currently happening with Neil Young, the situation with Neil Young and Joe Rogan.
Yeah, it's a good jumping off point. I think that Neil Young is a brilliant musician. I can separate his art from his blunders, and it's not the first blunders he's made. I can't particularly remember the band, but he's made a blunder before. I think in one of his songs about a band, he misunderstood something. So it's not like he doesn't have a history of actually coming out and commenting on something he's not completely knowledgeable about. So I think it's probably highly likely that Neil Young hasn't even heard that podcast. He's heard somebody talk about it.
Right.
And that's actually something that it happens on campus a lot too. People hear that they should not like a person and they actually don't even do their own research.
Yes. Yeah, no, and you've touched on something which I think anyone, academics and non-academics find it becomes a very visceral thing. It's not even about I don't know you, I don't like you to know you. You don't even know me to not like me, or vice versa. This group of person, you just heard the gossip, as it were, about this person or about this group on campus or off campus, for that matter, which it alludes to a further problem. I think that we've shed a richer light on during the pandemic is the inability to not only as critically think, but to critically read and critically engage with information and to disseminate that into smaller pieces and subsequently build it back up to understand its integral parts and how they function, the affects and effects of it. We've seemingly become just people who say, well, the experts say, or the specialists say on certain things. It's like, that's good, but you're also disengaging yourself from understanding the information. You're just saying, well, I can't do it, therefore I'm following or I'm leaning on this person or this expert in a particular manner.
And it's interesting because people choose which experts they want to critique and which they want to believe, right?
Precisely.
And so that's very popular in the academy, like whether or not somebody wants to believe. And there's not always consensus on these issues. And also, I mean, we'll talk more about medical issues a little bit further out, but medical information on stuff is never clear cut. Like there's always risks with certain things and stuff like that. And it's like we're not allowed to talk about them, but whether or not something is the right choice or not. But yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of an association fallacy, like the idea that, people are reacting this way towards Joe Rogan. And this was happening when I was actually in my grad program, right? Me liking Joe Rogan, potentially making me a white supremacist. Like this is, people don't believe it when you say that it's happening, much like they didn't believe my Through the Looking Glass article. People want to cancel Kurt Vonnegut or Margaret Atwood. And I'm like, yes. You must be lying. You must be some kind of conservative, or you're getting money from the some kind of conservative think tank. And I'm like, no, actually, I'm pretty progressive. And I just think that this is, no matter what your values or your ideas are, your political goals are, these methods are just not not the way we should want to go.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that hits really the heart of of this entire program of where I'm not really concerned of where you're coming from politically, socially. I don't really think that has a great deal of pertinence. More or less, what are the methods you're bringing forth? What are the ideas? Are you bringing forth anything that applies in a particular way that's beneficial to something or someone or so forth? So I think methodology have far more importance than just saying, well, it comes from this area, it comes from conservatism or left or right or all these things. I don't care. I genuinely have no concern with that, because if an idea is good, if it's valid, if it's provable, then it's good. I mean,
and the idea, I mean, and show me a person. Most people will have beliefs along the spectrum, right? So it's a false generalization to kind of put yourself in these camps or political camps or so on and so forth. And it gets you further and further away from actually talking about ideas, right?
Exactly.
And so that's just not useful at all.
Exactly. These aren't even talking points, which I think that's the intent too. That's the eerie intent. They're designed to cease conversation, to cease communication, to not engage with something you seemingly like or don't like. It's made, well, I'm now calling this conservative, which is like a particular lingo for something that's really not conservative. That's something probably a conservative wouldn't even like themselves. And it completely nullifies any attempt or any hopes of actually understanding.
It's a quick heuristic. Like, I can put you in this box and therefore now I can dismiss you because I believe I know what you are and what you're trying to communicate. But at the same time, I believe that multiple perspectives are important. So these things, there's all these incoherencies when you look at the stuff that's going on in the academy. And one of the things that I found, I think a large part of it is that when people especially are in an undergrad in social sciences, you learn all kinds of theories, right?
Right.
And so when you learn a theory, the important thing that's supposed to happen is you're not being told, this is just one person's perspective. You are given varying other perspectives, for example, in my intro to sociology course, and you're supposed to intuit that, these people disagree and it's okay to disagree.
Right.
But what happens now is that conversation about it, it's just a theory. This is one person's point of view. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so you have most people who are actually very secular people and don't have any religion, believing that this is now, right, moral, and like they get behind it with a sense of fervency. What I mean? It kind of replaces that morality, that religion that they don't have in their life.
Absolutely. No, Terry, I think you're spot on with that one. And that's a similar paper was written, I believe, last year, which I think you have may be familiar with it. Musa El Garba wrote a beautiful article just on this, on these, you might say, polarities of thought, and how they even within the two, if you use the idea of a polarity of a back and forth, there still is a ambiguity on both sides of how each individual thinks. There's not like no one fits into this idealistic box, even if you're on one side or the other. That's the irony.
Musa's, he's brilliant. There's a lot, we can't ignore the vacuum that secularization has caused in our lives, and the fact that we want to replace that, because we are meaning making people. That's absolutely correct. And without meaning, we suffer.
Yes,
I believe that. And it's much like this, and that's why these people so easily. I remember when I was in school, and the targets were Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, people who hadn't even seen what had happened to Lindsay Shepherd. Were so sure, that Lindsay Shepherd was wrong, and so sure that Jordan Peterson is bad. But they also get these very short, decontextualized clips of the things that he's saying. And look, you can disagree with Jordan Peterson about lots of things. I don't agree with everything he says, but he's definitely not the monster they're trying to make him out to be.
Absolutely. And you hit on a point there, Terry, which I think I've yet to. It's probably I'm kind of inspired myself from your works, actually, to write a paper on this. I don't know how I'd phrase it. Is the problem within not just media, social media, not just academia, but certain elements within society who who kind of build a golem. They create a golem. They create the golem from the story, from the rabbi in the story, creating that golem where out of mud, and you make it where it's not even. You make your own monster to such a degree where it's more than what you ever was or ever could be, where it might not agree with it, but you've actually created this thing to build it where it might actually topple you, but you're the one who's created it. It's not been something that came in a negative way or was formulated in a negative way. You created it in that way.
Right. So the more, I think the more precise there you'd want to go with, is it Cohen for moral panics? So,
right.
And this actually slides really well into what my undergrad research was. So my undergrad research was on actually a Montreal site made by some really young guys during the 2015 Canadian federal election called the True North Times. And they had seen a blogger, Robert Jago, be successful doing this. And then they kind of co-opted his technique. So Jago just was commenting on a bunch of candidates that had never been elected before. And he had shown some things they were doing that weren't particularly favorable. They varied in severity, but it didn't matter if something was as silly as somebody commenting on an epic rap video, they lost their candidacy. So this is one guy, right. Quillette. Another guy was a creepy guy who was calling people in Toronto, and yeah, it was really creepy. But yeah, there was a whole spectrum. And I think he got to the point where he realized, because he wasn't okay with what they did with the Newfoundland candidate, he was like, I was just commenting on it. That wasn't my intention. But then the True North Times took this up because they knew it would be successful. And they started doing it, and they, the parties reacted swiftly. Mm-hmm. So, and I think, so my thesis was very much about, the power of social media, how much power the party has to get rid of you if you don't fit some kind of Canadian consensus that really actually doesn't exist.
Right.
We know this doesn't exist between the city to the rural, to the east to the west, to Quebec and Ontario, which really controls everything in Canada.
Yes. Okay? Yes.
Good luck getting a government job if you've never lived in Quebec and Ontario and you're not bilingual.
Absolutely.
Good luck being a politician.
That's more, for those who are not Canadian or unaffiliated, that couldn't be any more factual than you don't realize that could not be any more to the truth than you could not get there. That is so true. We have this. So I'm going to stop you really quick before I forget. So the main point is that this was, you can create a moral panic over things. And it's not even necessarily that the public even agreed that it was a big thing. But if you can make the parties believe that it is detrimental to having you as an MP, then you're gone. And the problem is we live in a representative democracy. So if you're elected by the people in your constituency and you get into a party, yes, there should be some rules about who can get into your party, but the parties should not have the kind of power that they can get rid of you if you comment on an epic rap video, or they survey a cost once you get in. So, I think one of the big problems in Canada right now is that we have a population that doesn't realize we live in a representative democracy, and that we don't vote for a president, and there's a bit of fan worship, and so kind of strict. I had this conversation with somebody in the summertime, multiple friends, acquaintances. And they were a good conversation in the sense they got heated, but in a good heat. They weren't like where we got disgruntled and didn't want to talk to each other. But they would just on this very topic, and I was more or less bemused, but I was also intrigued the fact that the statement was, I wish Canada was more like the U.S., like a two-party system. The U.S. isn't a two-party system, not really. The parliamentary systems are more two-party systems in how they're set up, and this misunderstanding of what Canadian democracy is and what Canadian society, how it's set up, and not just the plurality but the immense plurality of Canadian society.
Yes, of course. And one of the biggest things that always bothers me is that people do not realize that this common idea that that immigrants, new immigrants, and especially religious immigrants are somehow progressives. And, and they don't realize how Stephen Harper had won in the suburbs of Toronto. And that, these are, again, these ideas that are given to people in university, and they have no real knowledge. They don't really know people outside of their academic circles and so on and so forth.
There was a point in my life where I found this to be disconcerting. Now I find it to be actually particularly amusing to me. I find no need to have a television. Just listen to a newsreel for a while, and you'll be set for the day, because it's like there is complete and utter disassociation with a kind of, for my listeners, if you don't remember, if you're unfamiliar with Canadian history, back, I believe, Terry, it was in the 60s, so the Trudeau phenomenon era, back in the late 60s onward to the early 80s, when the attempt was to have like a pan-Canada approach. We're all Canadian. And that still doesn't work, because I think the sheer, we're very provincialized in Canada. And even that, in that sense, like, Northern Ontario, Southern Ontario, Central Ontario, you're going to have a different feel, socially, politically, everything, economically. And certainly in Quebec, I think most people who are in Ontario or otherwise associate all of Quebec with Montreal, and I think that's it. That's what it is, and they're all similar, and they're going to think like that. Like, no, there's so much diversity of thought and political views, and that's a positive. That's a net positive, that we don't realize that. It's a shame. It's a shame that we don't realize that, because there is a lot of depth of beauty, but yet we have this very approach to Canada and approach to Canadian politics and everything else policy, that we think there is a consensus and on everything. And
the problem is this, like, so you have to think about who are the knowledge makers, who has the legitimacy, who claims the legitimacy to knowledge creation. So you have academics. So a lot of them, you'll see, there's some on Twitter, some popular, unpopular people who, their parents were professors. They basically are in a long line of professorhood, and and so, but definitely most people who become a professor have had parents who have also gone to university.
Right.
So there's a big divide between people who have never been to university, their families have never been to university, and people who are in university. And people who go into university get to create knowledge now. Prior, many years back, you wouldn't necessarily have gone to university to be a journalist. You could have gone to a trade school or programs or something like that, or learned on the job. But now what's happened is journalism programs are in university. And so the students take on the habitus and the goals of the university. And so this is why we're seeing now, over the last decade or so, people all kind of thinking very homogeneously and sounding a lot like university professors. And, the problem the problem with that is that we are not, when we get our media, we're not actually hearing points of view from people who are in different classes, working people, working people working in factories don't have time to spend on Twitter all day. They don't have time to really come back and give their opinions about what's wrong with Canada.
Absolutely. And, you make a good point within that. There wasn't that quite long ago where the idea of being a journalist, journalism as an ism was something that was immensely associated with and an important part of the middle class. It was very much. Now it's certainly not. It's not in many ways. There's a disassociation from it, due in part to the moving of the school, to the creation of the schools, but also the fact that they are housed in higher institutions of higher education. And I think with that, you also lose the certain flair and the certain individuality of a particular voice on the page. There's so much unanimity with how people write today because of journalism school. So it wouldn't matter who you're reading or what article. There's very much a unanimity in that writing, in that approach to a story.
Yeah, our best journalist right now in Canada is hands down Paul Wells.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think he's absolutely the best journalist in Canada right now. But the problem right now is that the major outlets, which are, for people who don't know, funded by our government, basically, our government's been keeping all of them afloat, not just CBC now. They've given them some money to stay afloat, for better or for worse. And so what happens is you cannot, journalism, much like it needs to be autonomous from the university, it needs autonomy. It needs autonomy from the state. It needs autonomy from the university. It needs autonomy from all kinds of agencies to be able to report well.
Absolutely.
And it really doesn't have that autonomy. And so that's kind of what's happening with journalism right now. It's why they're also you would always be fearful of what you would post in your paper, just to make sure that you're doing the right thing, or maybe because you're getting funders or whatever. But now it's jacked up. Now you're fearful of the government. Right. If the government is keeping you afloat, it's kind of hard not to be concerned about what you say about them. So I think that's a really big problem here now.
Right. And and what I think is often, I wouldn't say forgotten, but it's often presented in a particular way, is in that, due to that point, that very important point you made there, Terry, is it doesn't matter what party's in charge, is they're always going to get favor from particular agencies because they're funded by the government in charge. So it doesn't matter what government, whether it leans liberal, conservative, or what have you, that particular government's going to get favor by that particular media outlet.
Well, not necessarily the conservative government, because the conservative government doesn't really fund those types of things, although it may pour money into the National Post for all I know. I'm not really sure. I can't honestly tell you.
I'm not sure.
I'm grateful for the existence of the National Post, because otherwise we wouldn't know many things that are happening in Canada, because most certainly the Globe and Mail or CBC would not report on it.
Yes.
Or if they reported on it, it would have a very slanted frame.
Yes, it would.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm going to flip over to something else. So lately you were at the first Heterodox talk that
I was, yes.
Heterodox Canada. And it was basically, because it's related to what we're talking about. So it was basically about, there's a lot of, everybody's up in arms about equity and diversity initiatives. Jordan Peterson recently wrote an article about it. I agree with a lot of what he's saying, although there's a certain extent where I feel like he goes a bit.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, but I do agree, and especially the fact that his students will be treated wrong and not get opportunities because of who he is. That's completely unfair. And I believe a while back, UBC was screening psychology applicants to see whether or not they like Jordan Peterson, which is absolutely okay.
I'm aware of that.
Yeah, nobody would really believe this unless you were watching this all the time to see how bad it is here. But yeah. So anyway, but about the equity and diversity initiative, if you remember, I started off with just the basic claim that we do agree that having different viewpoints is important, and multiple perspectives. I think that's a premise we can all agree with, right?
Yeah.
We don't necessarily know about all the methods of enacting some of these policies, but my argument was basically looking at the data in Canada and showing what's actually missing in universities is people who aren't going there.
Right.
So it was very much a geographical and ideological vacuum. So universities are missing, and Heterodox actually, it was American, but it was showing how many people are in school and their political beliefs. There's a paragraph. But in Canada, I'm sure is a bit different because we are more progressive, but I'm sure there would be changes in that for us as well. But my point was that basically, first of all, politically, more people in Canada voted for the Conservatives in the last election, but the way things are divided, that just didn't equate to them getting the leadership.
Precisely.
But also people in non-city metropolitan areas are the knowledge creators, and they're not actually reflecting the views of people in rural communities or towns or whatever. And in fact, I've had teachers who've mocked farmers and oil workers, as if they're not, we would happily take more environmental things if they existed, but these people are just trying to feed their families, right?
Yeah.
And so the fact that they are so removed from that sense of kind of common sense and humanity was really, I honestly felt like I was in a class that was encouraging hate.
Yeah,
You know,
the only word I've been able to muster up that really I think gets to it is visceral. It's like a visceral that there's no rationale to it. It seems to me, I'll be quite frank, it seems to me that same visceral, I can't give a rational answer to it, visceral response as with a kind of anti-Semitism. Like, why are you like this? It just, I don't like them. It's
yeah.
that
And,
same visceralness to it.
and look, nobody in my class noticed it because first off, I'm a mature student and
Hmm.
I'm also from Cape Breton. And so, and my background is, my grandparents raised me. My mom was like 16 when she had me, but nobody in my family had even graduated high school. So for me to get an MA, that's like insane,
Right.
right? For me to leave Cape Breton and do that. But I understand exactly how people back home think. The positives, the mind forged manacles that stop them from
Yeah.
succeeding, every angle of it. But yeah, so anyway, but these people, what I'm saying is basically geographical diversity is not represented in the university. People from really the sense that there's your lifestyle in the provinces you live in the towns, and the jobs that your family have is a type of diversity.
Yes, it is.
And also your political, right? So my argument is basically that if we actually do want to do EDI, we're not doing it properly because we're not actually including those methods. And because EDI is something that is actually catered to students first, I think, then the right way is to approach university departments and convince them of this
Right.
and the good that it will do. And then automatically, if they understand that, it would also apply to professors as well. So yeah, the goal of the university in a fair way should be to try to represent the most vast array of ideological backgrounds and viewpoints. I'm not talking about Nazism. That's not acceptable, right? There are always limitations.
Right.
But yeah, so basically it should be a goal. And so that's something that we should think about. So that was the first talk. And I think it was received okay.
I believe it worked. I think you got you fostered a lot of critical thinking in those lectures, in those moments we all shared together. I mean, I for myself, I think it was filling the intellectual spark with more fodder for the fire, because I mean, I thought, wow, that's a good idea. I hadn't thought about it in that particular way. I hadn't seen anybody really address it in that particular way before. So I think you did a very net positive there in the way you presented it.
Well, and there you go. And I proved my own point just being who I was, right? So
Right.
it's not possible without somebody like myself coming in the classroom and saying,
Yeah.
this is the way people back home are.
Yeah.
They're also fallible like you're fallible.
Mhm.
And here's the way they see the world based on their economic understanding of it and the way they live their lives. And,
Yeah.
it deserves a place at the table too.
Absolutely.
And, maybe if we do that, we'll have a more complete university. The other talk that I did more recently for Heterodox Canada was, and I came up with the idea and the guidelines, and I asked Andy, he graciously played my devil's advocate for me. And it ended up taking 2 sessions because of the clips, right? So the first time I did it, I wasn't completely sure how long it would take, but yeah, I think it went pretty well. And it was basically the Netflix series, The Chair, which when I watched it, I was like, wow, this is interesting. This is a really good way to put some of these academic situations that happen in campus in context with relatable characters, so that people can kind of have the distance they need from it to kind of look at it from both sides. And so keeping that in mind, I selected some clips and I set up the guidelines of basically what I learned from my best philosophy professors. You want to try to capture a point of view of a character in the scene as charitably as possible. Don't strawman them. You're trying to have some humility, and then and also I'd ask them to take the side they wouldn't normally take in this debate, and then exercise that muscle, and then somebody else to do the opposing, and then we would all talk about the clips. And yeah, no, I think it really went well. And I proposed it also for the conference in Denver. So we'll see what happens. So
Yeah, so I'll cross my fingers on that for you there, Terry, because that was an awesome presentation, and the ideas were much needed. The ideas and the approaches taken, the methods you use, I'm saying for myself, I thought they were just brilliant. So, kudos to you, and I really do hope it goes to Denver and you're able to showcase it to a wider audience.
Yeah, I mean, just because I think we all no, none of us are perfect, and we could all
Right.
kind of get into the habit of flexing that muscle in
Absolutely.
in
Absolutely.
our lives. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important thing to do. I mean, there's so many things that unravel there. One thing is, just the thing that comes to my head is you want that on campus, in keeping what you were saying about your own background, and thank you for sharing that too, Terry. You want that on campus because you want that not just because of fairness and opportunity, but you want that type of thought understood. Is if you're only going to see that metropolitan, urban understanding within an academic setting, you're getting a very particular understanding of a society and a very particular viewpoint from within a society, and then subsequently impose in a society. Whereas if you have somebody whose background as yourself or someone else who's knows the economic, knows the politics, knows the society of a particular area and how others think in that particular light, you're now granting a type of power to that community that they hadn't had before by allowing, hey, this individual knows us, they understand us, they're one of us in a sense, in a very true sense, but they're also at this higher plateau now where they can also say, hey, I understand their voices, I understand where they're coming from. And so there is that needed, where we don't see enough of that today. And it always is labeled, I think, as we were saying before, it's labeled in a very negative way, as if, they're backwards, Nazis and all these weird elements. I mean, I recently, several months ago, I was talking to someone who was an acquaintance, and I was very shocked. I thought it was a segue to a really poor joke. And we're talking about stuff going on in Alberta, politics, what have you. And their response was, I would never want to go out there to Alberta because they're all white supremacists and racist. And I'm like, what?
How ignorant.
Well, how ignorant. I mean, ignorant. How completely. I'm like, I felt for every Albertan in that moment. I thought, I stood up and I said, no, I don't even know what you're talking about. I'm not aligning myself with that, but I respected this person, but I also said I could not stand there and just observe this and listen to this. I thought, no, I don't even know where you're coming from with this.
Yeah. And beware the people who make generalizations. I know that sounds like it's a generalization, but but honestly, and especially without information again, like, right. and it's kind of a way to signal. I think of humans as like anxious sacks of water. Yeah. And I think that's the best way to, the most empathetic way to see human beings. And it can explain a lot of the very good and the very bad. And so what happens is people very, very anxious about how they might be perceived will try to signal their allegiance to certain tribes and stuff like that. And they do it by saying, okay, my quick heuristic is that I am against Albertans.
Yeah.
Because, Calgary Stampede. I don't know.
Yeah. I've never been there.
Ridiculous. They're all cowboys or
yeah. It's a complete misunderstanding. I mean, for the same, absence of understanding and absence of rationale. By that token, I always say you should also be opposed to anyone who's not of your province. Then, if that's the token you're going to go, because you don't know anybody necessarily from Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Labrador, what have you. It's a very ignorant approach to take. And I think, even in packing with Jordan Peterson, I think one thing which I find, and you might agree with me on this, Terry, I'm not sure, is when it comes to Jordan Peterson, I think non-Canadians, but even Canadians, to some degree, depending on age dependent, have a misunderstanding of him, not just of his background, educational, where he's from, but I think there's a misunderstanding of, again, this kind of goes to the heart of what we were talking about before with heterodox and Canadian issues within Canada. There is a particular stream, I guess you might say, of Canadian intellectualism. There's a particular type of Canadian intellectualism.
Well, there is now.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Okay, like there has been.
Like
Okay,
he reminds me
there's
a
some
lot
excellent
of Northrop Frye. Like there's a lot of Northrop Frye. When I hear Jordan Peterson, I hear a lot of Northrop Frye.
But think of how old you're having to go back there, right? Like you go back to Goffman or Mills. Like there have been in McLuhan, right? Everybody knows McLuhan because of Woody Allen, right? And how well did he get treated? He didn't even get a department at U of T, right? So yeah, I think we're Irving Layton, Leonard Cohen. Right. I think we're hurting Canadian intellectualism, but we know why, right? We've always had a brain drain, partially probably because of the weather, and we don't live in igloos all the time. For any listeners who are not Canadian, but it can get cold. So partially because of the weather, but partially because you get paid so much more to move to the U.S. So even many of our best end up there. But yeah, I think that Jordan Peterson, I think he's doing wonderful things for men, important things for men, things you can't even talk about in the university now that are needed for men. Like last year, I finally found out through DNA sites who my dad was. And I found out that he died very young. I found also that I have half brothers and sisters who I still have yet to meet because of COVID, but this summer. But I found out he died very, very young of an opioid overdose. And so he was in Oshawa, and his birth certificate, his death certificate said unemployed iron worker. So he's probably working at one of the car plants there at the time. Right. So, we need to have, and this was back in the 90s. And so Canada has only been tracking this since about 2016, and the idea, the crisis, you would just see aspiration pneumotis on certificates. And, there was no, you would have to go back and track how long this has been happening, but it's been at least the 90s. And so, men now, there are more women than men in university. Men, the kind of roles that men used to be held to have changed for better and for worse, in some situations. We can argue about which one's the thing, but there's been problems adapting that with the secular vacuum. So the loss of meaning, there's not much community things happening, like you live your community. I think he is an intellectual, and I'd argue that with anybody who disagreed, obviously very politely, but there's many reasons why he is, I think, and he's I may not agree always to the extent that he takes things, or some, and I might say he is missing some valid points, but I do think he is a Canadian intellectual.
Yes, and I agree with what you've said there. I think I'm not in steadfast agreement with every word that he says, but I would certainly defend the fact that he is an intellectual, and certainly of a Canadian type of intellectual too. And when it comes to
he's a Westerner, right?
Yeah, and there is
when he was young, he ran for the NDP.
Yeah, I think he was actively involved in NDP politics too. I mean, and he certainly says, he says, I'm not. He said, as has said many times, he said in the U.S. and in Canada, I'm a liberal. I'm not a part of this particular rebranding, which I think is a good, I'm paraphrasing there, but that's more or less what he says. I'm not associated with that. I'm engaged with truth, engaged with reason, and I think that's a positive thing. You should be. So yeah, I don't understand the framing of these individuals. And again, it says a lot, not about the educational system or not about the academics, but about the inability for students, but also the inability for people within element of society who don't want to engage and harness their own skills of argumentation, but would rather disengage. And as the current jargon we're using today goes, is that we want to cancel someone, which seems to be more fervent desire to cancel, as opposed to, well, I know my idea is better, therefore I'm going to have an argument with you, and I'm going to bring my intellectual battalion to the forefront and show you that I have a better skill set than you do. That doesn't seem to be the case today, which you're losing something. You're doing yourself an injustice by not wanting to engage if you actually earnestly believe your position to be better.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you need to engage to completely understand the other viewpoints, and even if you're going to negate them, and it's okay. And you don't have to, I mean, aside from somebody who's saying, you should burn Jews or, Black people
Yeah.
or whatever, right? Like, you don't have to hate people.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
Exactly.
they have a different view than you about, the best way to do something or whatever,
Absolutely.
let people be wrong too. I
Absolutely.
mean,
I think there's an immense, but also a very great power in saying for oneself, I don't know. When you say I don't know, that opens the door to the possibility of knowing.
yeah,
There's a great power in that.
yeah,
There's great power in that. One of my perennial hashtags is stay curious. And I mean that very, very seriously. Stay curious. Don't presume to always be certain on things or have to have a position. Formulate. Ideation is a word we don't use anymore. And I think that the reason is we don't formulate ideas much anymore. We just use ideas from other people. But the process of ideation and formulating idea and going to what you were saying about meaning in a man's life or a woman's life or in a person's life, I think instead of creating a path for yourself for all that, I've always described it as forging your meaning in your life, forging yourself, because it's hard, it's arduous, but it also subsequently gives way to richer meaning when you're doing something strenuous for yourself to create meaning in the world, to create meaning for yourself in the area which you reside.
yeah. I mean, nothing easy ever really, forges you very well. I mean,
Yeah,
we do sometimes come across luck.
yeah,
Aristotle believed in luck. you know, yeah, it's important to go through, the man in the hole and
absolutely.
come up the other side, because it does help you. People who have not had it so good or come from an outside region often have certain advantages and stuff like that. And I think just going through some difficulties actually gives you advantages, as long as you come out okay on the other end. I mean, I'm not saying that there necessarily wouldn't be any trauma for people or anything like that either.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to make
Okay.
it so simple, because it really isn't that simple. But it's not like you only build fortitude of character and never have any damage, or and I think sometimes Peterson kind of like leaves that kind of area a little bit
Right.
wayside.
Right.
But overall, I do agree that challenges are good. You may not succeed all the time, but keep like kind of plugging away at things.
Absolutely. I'd like to kind of pose a question to you. What do you think, you're back with considering your studies and your background in education, what do you think with during the pandemic, I think it's increased more. What do you think with the increase globally, but perhaps within Canada, with the heavy increase of social media engagement, whether it be Twitter, Instagram, so forth, people are getting more of their information. I don't say it's for better or worse necessarily, but they're getting a lot of information compact into, let's say, a momentary clip.
Yeah.
And then trying to subsequently create, keeping with the idea of meaning, create meaning in the moment, if at least, but also create a worldview off of a 30-second video, maybe a 5-minute video if we're lucky. How that can't be a positive. That can't be a positive.
The internet is complicated. Obviously, when the internet first came, and we thought, democracy is going to improve. We're going to have access to voices, and we do have that too. And there's been a lot of positive changes, right?
Right.
And people have platforms now, but everyone has a platform. There are no gatekeepers. I think what's either going to happen is, it's hard to say what's going to happen because there's so many speakers.
Yeah.
Are we going to get better at knowing where accurate information is, or who the more reputable people are? I have some faith in this generation, like after me, the generation after me. I grew up on MIRC, and then, like, I'm,
Thanks for the belief in me, Terry. Thanks for the belief in
I
me.
just turned 43. So I'm like, this generation grew up on,
30th,
Reddit, and
30th
they are more ironic. They're not stupid.
Yeah.
I hate people who think that that this generation is, just because they're more online, they're whatever. I don't think that suppressing dumb things is the right thing. I don't know. I honestly don't know what the answer is. I do think the problem, and one of my first articles I published as an undergrad at the Canadian Journal of Communication was actually about, just the way that the internet does these things, and it's all about entertainment.
Yeah.
So I took a kind of Neil Postman view of it. And it's only like, I go back and look at that now, and I'm like, wow, it's only been exacerbated.
Yeah.
And so
you're using, you're in any case, I think you're, keeping with your point there, you all we're doing, whatever platform we're on, is we're amusing the algorithm.
Well, we're amusing ourselves to death. So basically, you notice it for something to carry on Twitter, the more ironic and self-deprecating you can be, or like whatever your humor is that works for you, right? For some people, I notice there's like a scale, and like depending where you're on the political spectrum, some leans towards mean, and I find that's happening at the left and the right now, and it used to be only a right thing. Yeah. It's really interesting, actually. Humor is a whole other topic, maybe we'll talk about someday. Look, I think for something to catch, you have the limitations of the word count, which has been increased since I wrote that article. But the fact you'll use images, the fact that you have to point to cultural, lightning rods to kind of get audience, but then you're detaching yourself from other people, from other audiences.
Absolutely.
Right? So look, it's I think something, maybe it's an education thing. I think critical thinking should be a course in university, but it needs to start earlier. I think it needs to come into high school, and maybe even younger. And I think that we shouldn't underestimate grade 6 kids, first of all. But we should bring in critical thinking, and I'm not talking about critical theory. I'm talking about philosophy, critical thinking. Teach kids fallacies, teach analytical philosophy, basically teach children how to, when somebody says something, capture it in a statement, the premise, and then talk about how how language works. And I think that should be just like a baseline. And if everybody had that baseline, they would be able to, and if they also learn charity and humility, because you can't actually engage if you just know that, you'll just go around kind of like, I'm super smart, I'm smarter than everybody else. You have to engage empathetically and try to steer people and say basically, oh, if I hear what you're saying, it's this, blah, 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 blah. Is that correct? And so on and so forth. And, I think that really it's tools. You can't, it's not about, we can't talk about it in terms of ideas, because first of all, I don't want to tell anyone any idea is right. We have to give people the tools to interact with other people humanely. And I think that literally should be our concern. And then it doesn't matter if you're on the internet or if you're in person.
Yes.
Although we usually tend to behave better in person.
Because
we can see people's eyes, and exactly.
Precisely. But
so I did work on that in my undergrad as well. So
I mean, it seems we're 2022. This is it's shocking that this conversation we're still having, that we don't know how to engage humanely with each other, online or off, for that matter. I recently had on a forthcoming episode, I had an interview with Candace Malcolm of True North. Wonderful conversation, and we were discussing about what to have Canadians. What can we do, not just politically, but provincially, have people understand the demographics in Canada, what methods, what things, what systems, what programs, for that matter, should be put in play. And something she had suggested that I thought was a brilliant idea, and I would love to see it actually come to fruition. And we both sadly thought it wouldn't, because it would involve a kind of agreement on a federal level of politics was to have a kind of program where, like, you go 18, 19 and you go away to out of province, paid for by and you have to engage, planting trees, whatever the program was. But the idea was to engage people out of province with your age range, perhaps formulate friendships, not just understanding. And, because we're we're in now, but we're always will be in a digital age, and it's getting more, you'll always be connected with this person. So you'll know how they think, and you understand them. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to think now in respect to that. And you'll get an understanding of not just your own residing. And it was a beautiful.
So what you're talking about is an interprovincial Rotary. Like, in high school, you have your Rotary students. So I still have
that's pretty much.
Yeah. Because we're growing so apart now on the level that we actually have to have, some exchange students. And, well, I think too, it's just we need to think about what is it in the pedagogy or the methods that has created this lack of empathy.
Yeah.
For people that that meeting people gets rid of that. Travel gets rid of that. Travel makes you, it teaches you stuff that education it's harder to do.
Right.
But yeah, that's interesting. And I imagine that she feels, I don't know her at all, and I don't really know her work, but I know of her. I imagine that she feels misunderstood.
Yeah.
Is she from Alberta?
She's originally from.
Is she rural?
Saskatchewan, I believe. Candace, if I got that incorrect, I apologize. But I believe it was from Saskatchewan. But she spent, had time in Toronto to work and there, and I believe she's currently resides there, actually, in Toronto. So she has a feel for both areas, and I genuinely sense that. We had a great talk about this misunderstanding of our talk was about conservatism and the difference between conservatism and what it means to be liberal, as opposed to what might call the commonality of liberalism.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I should watch your video. I do think it's even going back to what I said about the false generalization. I like what conservatism in Canada versus the US versus what other country, what is conservatism? Like, I think I think maybe what happens is everybody, before they get in a conversation with somebody, they have an idea of what box they're in.
Yeah.
Before they come to the conversation. And I think that we should just throw the boxes away.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think people will try to dehumanize you based on the box that they think you're in, or the box. Yeah. So, but I understand. I bet you, people don't understand the sense of urgency she feels and that she's trying to communicate, because they just literally just don't understand what it's like to be conservative or somebody from the prairies.
Absolutely.
And that's the fault of our universities, and that's the fault of our media. I strongly, and our government as well. Our government scoops up employees from Quebec and Ontario who are bilingual. Good luck, getting, so you have all these people, in these positions, and it becomes a problem. I mean, you can learn French in school. I took French all through school, but if you don't use it where you're from, you're going to lose it. And
absolutely. Yes, myself included with that. I took it through primary and post-secondary or secondary rather, and it's like I use it, but there are most people I know who did. If they didn't pursue it in some educational standpoint, they lost it because there was no opportunities to actually use it where they resided.
And not to mention the quality that you would get in a province, it wouldn't be sufficient anyway. Yeah. So it almost is sad in a way, because I mean, I have nothing against learning. I've tried. Every time I try to go into the French program here, I get so far and then I get a job. So I guess that's good. And I can read La Presse. I can read French. I just and probably even write it better than I can speak.
Well, funny enough, by the time I was 13, I started learning Italian. So I was late bloomer Italian. I also understand not just Italian, but also my family's regional dialect. So which is interesting, because it's the language component in that is Levantine Arabic, 16th century Spanish, and more ancient Greek than Latin.
Oh,
So,
very cool.
so I can subsequently, whenever I'm around friends of mine who have a Lebanese or Syrian background and they're speaking Arabic, I can't respond, but I know what they're saying to some degree. So
Huh.
I'm better at understanding that than I am French, which I find funny.
Yeah, there's no argument. We should be learning as many as we can. And
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully we'll have universal translator soon. The new Google phone is exciting. I haven't gotten it yet,
Yeah.
but I mean, if we start having that, then I think we will break down some of the walls we have in some of these jobs and positions, because, you have to be realistic. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there is, as you were saying before, language, in keeping with Peterson, keeping with the discussion points you made, there language you can try and muffle and try and hide and try and just every journalist, everyone's ever always like try and hide behind words, but language will give you away, because how you contrive an argument that is dependent on how you describe an event, an occurrence, or a thing. So language does give way to who you are, or at least who you are in that particular position. And
Yeah,
I think
and I'll tell you right now that I mask my accent because, and this is a conscious.
really,
I sound like a Cape Bretoner and Newfoundlander, and you know what will happen if I bump into somebody who's
I'm thoroughly impressed. Actually, I would never.
yeah, because I knew how
Yeah.
it was taken when I came to the city, but if I bump into somebody from back home, or if I'm angry, or if I have a if I'm drinking, it's immediately there. So and you just have an awareness of that, and you come to the city and you don't want to sound like that, because if you do, a lot of judgments will be made about you. So
That's unfortunate, because that's just one more element of diversity and variety and the truest essence of the spice of life that I wouldn't want. I wouldn't want everybody wearing a suit and tie, white shirt all the time. I want someone who's going to have a little flair. I want diversity and the truest sense, in the most richest sense of the term. I don't want,
yeah,
you know,
look at CBC, right? Like I guess Rex Murphy was the only person who sounded like anybody who didn't sound like anyone. Like
yeah.
even Ian Animancing, right? Like he sounds he has better English than me. He's wonderful, by the way. I'm just
Good point, I'm
like,
always.
but I mean, where's the
point.
cultural, where's the representation? They say representation, but and they do all these other types of things, but where's the outside of Ontario and the cities and Quebec and your heavily university educated, where's the class diversity? Where's the prairie diversity? Rex is out now, so where's the maritime diversity? And BC, sometimes it comes out, and I, but yeah, it's a problem, I think, and I think it's not just the accent; it's the words we use.
Right.
And
like I personally, I mean, I don't know. I admittingly say I've always embraced it, but I think it's always been something I laugh at. I'm very odd. People think I'm put together. You're a gentleman. I am, but I'm a very odd sort. I am. I'm the kind of kid when I was younger. I loved language. Language and words are my first love. So much so that I studied aside from antiquity and ancient languages. I thought, well, Canadian language is pretty cool, like our English, the way we use language. It's not British anymore. It's not really American, but even like the distinction between Islander speak and mainlander. I love that. I love that. Out East. I love that. It's so cool. And there are so many Canadians who are just like, what is that? And like, that's horrible to me. You don't know what that is. That's so cool.
Everybody should, if they haven't yet. That's like I'm the spokesperson for the East Coast. You have to go to Halifax. You have to go to Cape Breton.
Well, my thing prior to the pandemic was to go to Cape Breton. I've been wanting to go to Cape Breton since I was probably since I was 22, actually, because I wanted to go to Glen Norah too.
Oh, the
distillery.
Distillery.
Yeah. Big Inverness,
right?
Yeah, big whiskey buff I am. So I wanted to go there, but I just love it. Everything about I have an addition to being Italian, I have a Scottish heritage. So there's a huge element for me that wants.
I can see that. Yeah. I can. No kidding.
Is it obvious? Is it obvious?
Yeah. So it's funny. You go to Cape Breton, you get to Cape Breton. If you can still find a phone book, but you would open the phone book and it would be like, McNeil, Matt Donald, like whatever. So And there's still a Gaelic, Scottish Gaelic. There's a
Right.
Scottish Gaelic college, right? And so I encourage you to go there and check that out too. But and the Highland Village, but
Oh,
the Fortress of Louisbourg for the French. You know,
right.
we have a little bit of everything. But back home, it's very much we are Irish and Scottish, and we are there is some Italian there. There's French, of course, and you know, maybe maybe a bit of there's some Lebanese. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, there's a few mixings of I think some Polish and stuff like that. But yeah, it's but otherwise, you know, you will definitely, I think you will still find that there's a heavy dialect there.
Right.
And if you go to Newfoundland, you'll find that, and that's where my ancestors all kind of landed first.
Okay.
So and you know, you'll find that the dialect is stronger there. Because
Okay.
they're kind of annexed, right? Cape Breton's annexed from the mainland. Well, by causeway, we have a causeway, so we have to get a ferry to Newfoundland or fly. But you'll find that the dialect is stronger there, and it's mixed with British English too.
Okay.
And, yeah, but highly recommend if you do get the chance, you know, to go, because there's a lot. If you're interested in language, a place where Scottish Gaelic is still spoken is, yeah.
I love it. I love it. You know, I made a point several years ago I want to say early, well, more than several, I'm 30 now. So early 20s, mid 20s, to really, for about 2 summers, I just steadily learned Gaelic. I wanted to know how to use the word, just for pure, honestly, just for pure embellishment, pure arrogance. I wanted to know how to use it because it's cool. I want to say something that sounds really important, but it's just really not anything other than I'm ordering a cup of tea or something like that. Yeah. But it's really fascinating. And there is you know, my Scottish background is Clan Cameron. So I'm proudly have the Parton and so forth. And there's a rich history. There's a rich history to it. And I love it. But yeah, the elements that we don't understand, I mean, even that, you know, even this moment of the conversation right now, there's so much rich history that we have amongst each other within Canada. You know, I would say it's even more than diversity, but it's a rich connection we have with each other, with so many elements. So, you know, if we actually just had the opportunity, and you know, I think it's a shame that there is it's cheaper to travel to Europe in many cases than it is to travel within Canada. That's a unfortunate element too.
Yeah, that's really bad. For me, it's a really hard thing, especially the degrading of the rail service, because my grandfather worked on the railway. He was on the back car of the CN. He was in a CBC commercial many years ago.
Oh, cool.
Before he retired, waving from the back of the train, and everyone, whether or not they were related to or not, called him Uncle Bars. His name was Barsley. You know, so I used to go on the train with him. It was amazing. But his father also worked on the train. And so the train, eventually the Via Rail stopped going to Cape Breton, and it's going less and less. It only goes to Halifax now and whatever. And then every time they upgrade it, it becomes an upgrade to the cars, and then an upgrade to this and whatever. And they just keep kind of, you know, I don't know why they're spending so much money on insufficient upgrades. You know, why not a high-speed rail from, you know, first from Toronto to Montreal, and then, you know, so on and so forth, you know, do the highest traffic places. People could live farther out of the city. It just makes sense. You know? And you know, I guess as many ways as they can waste money on the way there is what they're trying to do. I mean, why not do that infrastructure stuff now? So yeah, it's really unfortunate that people cannot. That is probably why we don't connect so much. People don't connect so much because they cannot travel cheaply within Canada. I mean, look how many taxes are on a plane ticket here. You know, the ticket itself is not so bad. It's just the taxes, right? Yeah. And I know there's environmental concerns, and I know there's whatever. I prefer the train to a plane personally, but
likewise, I do actually. I think it's a much more engaging ride. As opposed to
you can relax.
You can relax on it. You can read. You know, you can actually see, if you're fortunate enough, if it's done in a very proper way, I guess you might say, you can actually observe outside your window the natural beauties of Canada, you know, wherever you're going. So there is that element. And there is something that just really grand, really great about going on a train. I mean, I do like it. And it's a shame we don't have a kind of interprovincial connection, interprovincial agreement on how we get these railways done, how we can have more subsidy.
Like a renewed constitution, a
Yeah.
renewed Canadian constitution, right?
Yeah, it would lead
many years back, the bridge to PEI, the Confederation Bridge, was a part of that, right? Like they never got connected, kind of thing. Newfoundland, of course, has never been connected, and it's probably like, why did we even join? Free Newfoundland, free Labrador. But
there's a move for you.
Sometimes I can't say I blame them. It's not like they're represented at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
we in so many ways, and there's something, it's not uniquely Canadian, but it is uniquely Canadian in this particular scenario, is these little, and they are little, but when you think about it, but they have a big impact overall, give way to the fact that we're not so connected physically, but also socially and politically. We're so disengaged from each other. And then what information we do gather is either misleading or completely erroneous when it comes to it, because we're so not there. We're not in that area, and we don't have the opportunity to go there. It's an unfortunate reality, and we should have more infrastructure to allow Canadians across provinces, across regions for that matter, to travel with ease. I mean, I can't see how it's a win-win for anyone involved on both the industrial level and the political level, the commerce level. It's a win-win. And yet
sometimes I think it's just whoever's giving these contracts to people and making the money, they're finding whatever way. I honestly believe this. I don't usually like to ascribe motivations to people, but I think they're finding, right from the original, from not too far back, they updated the train cars to what they're proposing more recently about the dedicated track. It seems to me that they're finding ways to make money for themselves.
Right.
And I would just if you actually went in there and had somebody who was actually really concerned about the people and that this stuff was servicing, I think you would get a different result for these type of infrastructure developments. But you have a bunch of people who are probably, government and fat cats and coming in there and saying, how much of this can I put in my pocket? Who can I award this contract to? And I don't like to think of things necessarily negatively this way, but that's how I've been, guessing this must be going, because it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, Toronto has a huge housing problem. Why are they not making it easier for people to, even travel there to work from outside of the province, or come, like stuff like that?
An analogy
further away and not be broke. You're in Ontario, right? But you're not in Toronto, right?
No, I'm in the Niagara region.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely insane to live in Toronto.
And
who would pay what
crazy.
they're paying?
Our housing market here hasn't stopped growing for the last 7 years. Let's say this complete conservative. Let's say 7 years. Because of that, most people are retirees or people who can't find good housing in Toronto or even in the GTA have come to the Niagara region, all areas of the Niagara region, to buy housing, subsequently increasing the value of housing here. But it also leaves it also creates a new dynamic where people who live in Niagara, who are there, also now finding hard to afford houses in their own area now, subsequently. So it creates a new dynamic. So it's very much of a problem. So I think, that's what I mean by there's a lot of ripple effects when you don't have that connectivity via a rail, train connections, and that opportunities. You're giving way to other little issues down the road too. And I mean, we have started, I believe it was 2 summers ago. We have weekend rides from the Via Rail. I believe it's the Via Rail to Toronto, but it's the earliest. It's like only like 7 in the morning, I think it is.
Red Eye. Red Eye train.
And the last one coming home is like as a really obscure time too. So it's like you're not the opportunity, and I'm like, you would have a lot more people, a lot more youth energy would probably want to still reside in Niagara, because that's one of the issues we currently have had for increasing. It's not getting better. I don't see.
Well, you should be bringing this to your MP.
Yeah. I try. It's one conversation that I hope to have in a future conversation, a dialogue, which I think has many benefits. I want to talk to have an open table conversation. It's on my YouTube channel. I posted the last conversation I had with our mayor, and I'm trying to have one with our local MPP and our local MP, talking about one is an NDP, one's a conservative, talking about the different dynamics, but also talking different dynamics for how it affects the region and why we need to have a working force coming together politically, socially, who's across party lines, that can benefit people here, especially youth. I mean, a lot of youth energy is either leaving the province or leaving the area completely for work.
Yeah, I mean, Niagara is a beautiful place. Yeah, that's the one thing I could say. You know, I have a lot of, problems with the way Quebec does things. It's so funny. I think it's like simultaneously the best province and the worst province in Canada, and I don't know how that's possible, but it is. So we were lucky enough to have Valerie Plante here as mayor. And then we're unlucky enough to have Legault as our, Papa Legault.
I put for one reason, I really put Montreal, probably not all of Quebec, but really Montreal on a pedestal, because I like the fact that my Europeanness that comes out. I love the idea that I can walk down the streets. I love the idea where everything's that close. Well, we're in Niagara, it's not an opportunity. In large portions of Ontario, it's not really an opportunity to do that. But especially within Niagara, you're not going to be walking down the street to go to your place. You need a car, you need even a bike. You need to do that. And in that case, sometimes you couldn't necessarily bike everywhere. It's not necessarily possible, which is unfortunate. I think, and we've set up things in such a way in North America, but especially in Canada, which is surprising, where everything is so far away from itself, which is, I think it's telling it how we approach everything. Everything is so distant from itself.
Yeah. So we have the McDonaldization, everybody setting up the shop, the stores and the suburbs outside of the thing. It's awful. Yeah. I mean, but like Montreal is unique with old Montreal, except for old Quebec. If I was fluently French, I would live in Quebec City. I think it's the most beautiful city in Canada.
I have not been there. So
oh, wow. It's so amazing. Halifax, of course, has a place in my heart because I spent a lot of my 20s there. It's beautiful as well. But it's a bit too small for me. Maybe I'll retire there. Montreal, it's so unique. And if it was anglicized, it would definitely be destroyed. I understand that it is the way it is because it is French. And so that's why I kind of understand and I understand how the French felt here originally before they did the language laws. Do I think they're overstepping in terms of things they're trying to do to CJEPs and stuff? Absolutely. I also think that they falsely believe that they, by getting people to speak their language, that means they're French. And I think they've come to the recognition that's not necessarily true.
Right.
And, they don't reproduce at the rate they used to. Basically, there is demography studies that show, back when the church was in control, before the Quiet Revolution, people would sit in church and the priest would point down at them and say, why aren't you having more babies? And so they used to have a historically highest birth rate in Canada, 15 kids per family, and they would just keep having babies for the church. And then when they rejected the church and brought in the CJEP system and stuff like that, now they have historically the lowest birth rate in Canada. So they're not replacing themselves. So they're in a unique situation. So I kind of understand sometimes their anxieties, but I do think that they take it too far. It's beautiful. It would definitely be ruined if it became English. Should it separate as a bilingual island with some of the same values that are put on? Probably. It should be a cosmopolitan island with a bit, not much different than it's running right now, but without the language police coming around and doing harassing businesses that have to be closed because of the government because they don't have enough English posts on their Facebook page.
Yeah, I mean, and to those to listeners who are listening to the audio version of this or the video version, it's both a laughable but not laughable entity that happens in Quebec. It's a reality, and it's a horrible reality. It is harassing businesses, shopkeepers, because of something that's so erroneous and so stupid. Frank,
I understand why they're doing it.
Hmm.
I understand they want to be served in French and stuff like that. And I think that everyone should strive to be bilingual. I think like 80% of Montreal is bilingual anyway.
Right.
And and you know what happens is, but the problem is they're against the idea of people switching to help each other. They're against the bonjour, hi. And so when people meet, often they will start and try to, out of respect, speak in the other person's language, and then switch. And this is why it's so hard to learn French here if you're English, because most people in polite list will switch to your language. I'm like, no, let me try. I want to try. Je veux essayer. and it just, it just unfortunately doesn't happen. Absolutely. You'd have more luck in Quebec City, but yeah. But I mean, again, I think that if Montreal became completely English, it would turn into Ottawa. And I'm sorry, Ottawa's like a godforsaken hell. Can I say that on your podcast?
You can say
okay, good. I can swear. Oh wow, I've been holding back.
You're holding back.
There's like I don't know if you know, there used to be
fervor. Where's the East Coast fervor? Don't hold back.
Next time I'll come right out with it. So basically, I think there's a bar in Ottawa. I don't know if it's still there, but it has like this signpost and all these things pointing to different cities and how many kilometers and what direction. It's like, anywhere but here. Serious.
Yeah.
Capital used to be in Quebec, right? In Quebec.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I went there when I was younger, and for about 2 days I was in love with Ottawa. Like, oh wow, it's great. Then after 2 days, like, okay, and this is I'm just like, it's why why, like, why it's like ramped up way. It's like way too much of it. It's almost
pretty sure it used to be a swamp.
Yeah. Really. when I think, I was like, why? Like, it tries so hard as an area. It tries so hard to be more than what it is. It's which I don't know. I can't compare that to any other capital. I can't compare it to that. It's a very, I don't know, maybe it's a reflection of our politics. Maybe it's a reflection of the historical element of Ottawa, but it's just very, after 2 days, after you see the sites, the notable sites and so forth, you're like, okay, I'm ready to
the museums.
Thank you very much.
You can't get into Parliament now and see the squirrels on the walls. Yeah. They're so adorable. Yeah. But I mean, come on.
Right? 100%.
Look, I mean, we have such a complex, right? And part of our problem is that we compare ourselves to the United States all the time, in the sense that we're better than them. That's like our moral superiority. Yeah. But at the same time, we do not think about how we're unable to create or attract or keep intellectuals here. And I mean, there's so many, Carrie, you might remember his name, long before either of our times, but there's so many notable persons, and I'm saying Dr. Wilfred Penrose was the name, the one who developed he founded, I believe, was the Neurological Institute of Montreal. Most Canadians don't realize it's not even just the penicillin, the baby formula, all that kind of, but there's so many things that Canadians created, and it's like it's not. I don't accept the premise that we're humble and it's not kind, humble. I think it's just a kind of an ignorance to it. And it's not. I say that as a proud Canadian. It's like an ignorance. So I don't know why we have that. It's trying to deal with a sense of inferiority. I think, going back to everybody's an anxious sack of water philosophy that I have of human beings, trying to deal with the inferiority by claiming a moral superiority. Like they might have this and whatever, but we do the right thing. We're good. We're better people or whatever. It's a fallacy. It's a very poor fallacy, because it's in one sense it's a fallacy of association, but it's also a fallacy of appeasement to authority. You're appealing to authority of its tradition. It's our way, therefore it's substantially the better way. Not really. I mean, there's not the better way. And then if you stand out in Canada, they will tear you down. That's a tall poppy syndrome, right?
Yeah.
They want to tear you down. So it's this kind of cycle.
Yeah. And I think to an earlier point you made in this podcast about which is true. I think it's consensusly true across Canada. Probably one thing we probably unanimously all agree on, for better or worse, is we are a progressive country, but not in the way that I think we're always perceived by people outside of Canada. You know what I mean? You know what I mean by this? Like, we're not in that way. Like, for instance, you look at NASDAQ, the oldest company on there is like 15, 16 years old. In Canada, we're looking like the mean average company is like 109 or 119 years old. We don't really have a lot of energy to create new. We have a lot of energy for inventions, for pursuits, for academic, even people like the Peterson, like people who are delving into the controversial for the good reason, to actually get fervent thought going, and people get critical engagement. And we either toss them aside, or we just don't acknowledge that. That's a bad thing. I don't know. I don't see that as being sustainable. I think right now we don't see it as being sustainable.
It has to start earlier. It's not just universities, it's the whole education system needs an overhaul. And I mean, they have made small changes to it over the years, the awful stuff, that they've done to Indigenous people, but they still have a lot of work to do. But also just, I honestly, this is what I would do. I would take elementary schools and I would make it, I would change the fact that you need an education degree. I would make it so that elementary teachers had to have an MA. And I would make it so that they had an MA in math, an MA in science. I think that we greatly misunderstand how capable our young kids are of learning and how open they are at this point.
Absolutely.
And they would come up with, better, they would be experts, and they would come up with better ways to introduce them to math and science earlier. And, and the same thing with high school, at least an MA or whatever. And I love the CEGEP system here. So it's so unique in Canada. We don't have it in Nova Scotia. So basically you go to school here to grade 11, and then you do 2 or 3 years of CEGEP, and then you go to university. And it's such a great thing because it's basically free. And what happens is it gives you a chance to try out different subjects in college setting without having to worry about debt or failing. And just seeing if it's for you and what you like, before you take like any kind of major risk. And I think for where I'm from, if you do shitty in high school, you won't go to university, and especially if your parents haven't gone to university. But it's that bridge of CEGEP, which people it starts to become a norm that you go to it, right? And it kind of creates a bridge, and it gets rid of the despair. Like, I have an opportunity. You can learn professions, right? So you can be an anesthesiologist in some, or police tech, or whatever. They have various nursing all over the place, without getting into massive debt, and, giving you hope, right? And still having the prestige of a college,
Absolutely.
Under the same roof. And, I think that should be implemented across Canada.
Yeah.
Because I don't think everyone should necessarily go on to university. I have great respect for the trades. I don't think that, I do think that you should learn critical thinking and analytic thinking, and problem solving and good math and stuff like that. But I don't think that necessarily people should go to university.
Yeah, no, I'm in complete agreement with that. I think not, I wouldn't say always people, but I've been in conversation with people, I think, misunderstand what I'm saying sometimes when I promote critical thinking, and they think that's an academic thing. I'm really confused by that sometimes. I think, no, that's a human being thing. You just want to engage that process.
It just should happen earlier. That's all.
Precisely. This sounds like
I think you can't do it. You can't do it if the teachers aren't smart enough. Like, I'm sorry, it's not that they're not smart enough. They haven't learned it, right?
Yeah.
And they have to be able to learn it and understand it and model it. It's not something they can't be putting it up on a PowerPoint. They have to know it, understand it, get the kids excited about it, get them excited about thinking, and do it much earlier.
Absolutely.
I have just as great a respect for somebody who works on a lobster boat as I do who somebody has a MA or PhD. Sometimes I often have more respect.
You took words around.
It depends on them, because sometimes when people stay in university and they never done anything else, they become very, very narrow people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Your network, your network becomes very, very, very specialized. Your network, even of people you associate with and know, and you might think yourself to be a diverse person because I'm in physics, but I know someone in sociology. That's my diversity. But you don't know anybody outside of your academic environment, which is I know exactly what you mean by that. And I certainly, depending on situation, context, and the individual, where I have greater esteem and greater appreciation for somebody who's working, on a fishing boat, on on a trade, than I have somebody who necessarily has an MA or PhD. And sometimes because they're able to intune. You're a good conversation, able to understand them and what they're doing. Sometimes it has more importance than somebody who has an MA or PhD, because not everyone needs to. There's a weird, I don't even think it's I mean, I don't know stats on it, but I don't see empirically, I don't observe it to be, from what I know and people I've talked to, I don't think it's an American thing, but it's certainly a Canadian thing where this is at least in Ontario, a presumption where you have to, you finish high school, well, you have to go to college, university, you have to.
Well, it's definitely a class thing, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, in a good way, if you're from an immigrant family, they're going to tell you they will say to you often, you're going into engineering or business or science, because they know that the arts are, a leisure, discipline. Like who has the leisure? And, I don't really mean that so much about philosophy, because I think you can get philosophy and then you can apply it to absolutely anything. But then again, it depends on the teachers you get.
Shout out to all my fellow philosophy majors.
No, I definitely feel that way about philosophy if it's done well. But there's not even a guarantee now that.
And
but why not do construction? So why not learn how to build your, like, I more increasingly wish I could build my own house, like or a cabin in the woods, like and just just the idea of doing stuff with your hands. The fact that we devalue.
Absolutely. And this symbols to a conversation we've had well before, during the coming to fruition of this conversation, is something I love doing myself. Is when I don't know something, I don't say, oh, therefore I'm going to find someone else to do it for me. I really get intrigued with, now I'm learning a new skill, whether it be something in physics, hands-on, or a theory or something, but especially hands-on. I love actually learning something, how to put pieces together, how to build something, whatever. I mean, I don't like the idea of being handy. I like the idea of learning something that I can do and be dependent for myself. So whether it's something with woodwork, whether it's something with, plumbing. I mean, I'm actually ridiculously good with plumbing. Don't know why. Don't hire me, folks. I don't think I'm going to do your bathroom anytime soon, but I'm really good at plumbing. I like the idea where I never get frustrated. I get intrigued. I don't know this. I want to find the answer. And it's that same
problem solving, right?
Yeah, it's that same mindset. It's like, oof, now I don't, something's not working. Got to do it now. I've got to find this out. And so, I mean, I think we see that people are kind of connecting with that now more to get more meaning in their lives. I mean, if you ever peruse, I'm a big fly on the wall on, like, TikTok and stuff like that. I don't actually create any content, but people fixing up their homes. I know nothing about it.
Learning how to do it. I think. Yeah, no, I mean, it's very interesting. I think that's where all the advertising is gone. But anyway, so they're learning how to fix up their home and do these types of things, and they're really getting this kind of sense of worth from it, because it is like being able to create even refinishing furniture, adding boards to your wall, or whatever you're doing to your home, learning how to do those things. It's so fulfilling. And we being taught that a university is like the pinnacle of success really robs people from kind of finding, those crafts and trades that they might be interested, even if they're on the side, And
that's the thing, and going back for a moment, you kind of gave a good point, really good point there, Terry, to what you're saying about Peterson and men, says positions on men's and so forth, and all that, and meaning in one's life. it also gives, I think, an opportunity for the idea, what's that? Viktor Frankl has a man's search for meaning. Also I gives it not just searching for it, but literally creating it in the physical world. You're literally creating something for yourself in the physical world, and I think there's something to that. There are so many times where I forget the stats now. I used to look at it all the time, and I found it amusing, but also kind of sad, where there were so many Google search where you put in the lines, how to be a man or something, how to be a man. There were so many searches for that, like how to be a man with what, I'm like, why is that a Google search? Why is that a Google search? And it's really interesting. I don't know this. I'd love to know if anybody's done any research on this, but there's a lot of Google searches where I think how to talk to women, how to do this. Like, you open up your mouth and formulate a sentence. How do you do it?
Well, men are getting increasingly fearful, right? Because there's all these several, there's been, horrible ideas about what women are for in the household in the past. We can't deny that. There was a book when I got home ec in my high school, and they would read it to us. Your husband comes home, don't bother him with your worries, let him put his feet up, feed him, all this stuff, right? And so obviously that was a problem, right? Now women have meaning, but there's new problems created by both parents being in the workforce, and for children and for families, and now you require 2 incomes to do things, which makes it more insane. And if you choose not to parent that way, your life is incredibly difficult. But men are looking for ways not to also get in trouble accidentally. I mean, the idea that, it seems bizarre to me that, if you're on a date and you're reading signals and affectively, and you think it's okay to lean in for a kiss, that you have to ask for a kiss. That seems bizarre to me. But I would hope at the same time, there's not people going around that are, we have to take into consideration that not everybody reads social skills well. But the idea that a guy might be even afraid to enter into a relationship with a woman or go on a date because he's going to end up becoming the subject of an article like Aziz Ansari's date, right?
I never forgot that. Yeah, that was a very notable.
Exactly. I mean, if you go up to a guy's, broadcast, if you go up to a guy's apartment that late, you are signaling something. It doesn't mean that you have to go through with it or that you don't want to, but feel free to express that you want to stop. You're not a mouse. I think in addition to teaching men about women, we have to say, women, express your feelings,
Exactly,
I'm sure Aziz Ansari didn't communicate to her that he would have hurt her or whatever. She had communicated her feelings, but it really is, women do need to start feeling comfortable communicating along with men being educated about certain things.
There's a lot.
It goes together, right? It's not either or.
No, it's not either. And that's the kid. That's the point that I think we miss too often. It's not an either or.
Did you see the Caleb thing? The New York guy?
Everyone's telling me, no, I know of it, but I haven't read on it. So I haven't. I know of it.
It's really gonna, I don't know what the gist is, that, a bunch of women are on some kind of dating app. I don't know what dating app it is. And one filmed the fact that this guy had ghosted her, this Caleb guy, and he was a furniture maker in New York or Brooklyn, I don't know. And then basically they all started to catch on that he had dated all of them. Surprise, surprise, he's on a dating site and he dates multiple people. And, he might go on and move on to the next person and decide whatever. But one girl did a video, and it was as if, she started like, I found this guy, I put him into my arsenal of men. And then she goes on about how upset she is that he ghosted her. But it's like, you just said that you had an arsenal of men. So what that tells me is that although she may be performing the fact that she kind of likes this quick dating or promiscuous kind of lifestyle, deep inside, if she's being honest with herself, she doesn't want that. And she's not able to articulate that she wants that. And I think that's the great incongruency with this kind of Tinder generation, some people do want it. I'm not saying that everybody feels the same way about, that kind of stuff. But my point is that it sometimes becomes quite obvious that it's not what somebody wants. And then the dangerous thing is that they will lash out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
consequences would be
Yeah. The modes to navigate it for the individual to, you might, to express their dissatisfaction with it, that they want something else for themselves, doesn't seem to be an opportunity for them to do it. Or for some reason they think within the society currently, this current zeitgeist of society, that they can't say that, which is,
well, I think it's even more, I think it's more even just more simple. Like, I'm a sexually liberated woman and I'm doing this and I'm just like a guy and I want this. And it's just not.
But see, that I think is, I think, to your point there, Terry, I think that's where I, the error is the presumption that all men are like that too. And I don't think that's a falsehood. That's a falsehood.
Yeah. They're holding that too. They're holding that idea. And then when they realize that it actually doesn't work for their heart,
right,
and for what they want, it's not really true to themselves, and it damages them, and it kind of damages them, I think, cumulatively. But they are still.
It gives way to a lot of poor narratives, which is something I've recently. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Terry. But it gives way to poor narrative, I think, which I. Honestly, I'm really someone who likes to listen to friends, female friends of mine, but just I like to listen to people, but I just like to know. And it gives way to this narrative, which I think it's a very North American thing. I don't know any woman of any age in Europe who has this. I'm not generalizing. There might be some, but it doesn't seem to be more pervasive in North America. Is this self-description, self-narrative, or a believing of a kind of ether of narrative that I'm broken, I'm damaged, and like what are you talking? Why are you describing yourself in those terms? Like, why do you want to describe yourself in those terms? I'm not saying that something has horrible things haven't happened to you once time, multiple times, but whatever those things are. But why do you want to embody that permanently? Why don't you want to, do something for yourself, not for him, not for her, not for other person, but do something for yourself? Why do you want to uphold that narrative and let that narrative describe you?
I think it's complicated. I think you're right.
Yeah, no, I think it is complicated. I don't know how to handle it, but
I think the victim thing is a big thing. But I think at the same time, there are a lot of damaged women. And I think it's because, and you can look up stats on this, so a lot of women will be molested in their life.
Right.
Okay. There are a lot of things that happen to women by family members and, mothers, boyfriends, people who enter into their lives and get away with it. And, a lot of it's shocking high, actually.
Yeah.
So do I think a lot of women have damage? Yes. And I think that they do. Do I think that it helps them to not, go get some CBT and like talk about it and try to, realize that, what happened to them is not their fault and
yes.
Kind of, just get a sense of power back in their lives and stuff. That's the right thing to do. I don't think there might be a period where you see yourself as a victim until you get into that transition. Absolutely. And we have to be, I think, kind of patient with that. Yeah. But yeah, it's not an identity that I think helps anybody. No. Because we are like, look, the brain is you're capable of changing your perspective, and the brain you can do that through counseling and I think people should be not encouraged to.
Absolutely. I think
that kind of status is
I think, entwining both that for both men and women, I think the one thing, in keeping with the searching for meaning and purpose in one's life, I think one of the connective elements, might say, I don't want to say commonality, one of the connective elements, I think, is the one thing with the victimhood aspect, the mentality, whatever you want to call that, does, but other things in this current element inside this current feel inside it, is the removal of hope from people. When you remove hope, that I think, of all the things you could do and can do, it's the one thing you should never do to someone. If you think someone, even if someone, I got to agree with, I forget how we phrased it, but I think, the conversation, if you really want to see, if you already think somebody's, bad or horrible already, just tell them they have no hope for their own redemption, for themselves. Not the fact that you're going to forgive them for anything, using an example there. But if you're going to remove hope for somebody, you just watch how unhinged they will be. You just watch how horrible they will be, potentially.
Yeah. And like, you see this, like, I mean, if you grow up in a small town that I did, and many of us have left. My best friend is gay, and knew that very early on in life, and we left because it was was horrible for
Yeah.
him and horrible for us. I was from elementary school, I was carrying around an encyclopedic dictionary, and they called me Dictionary Terry. So my life was going to be
commonality. We just found a commonality between us.
I was like, I have to, no, I didn't know right away that I needed to get out of there. And in fact, David Brooks wrote an article a few years back about his friend that he took to a sandwich shop,
right,
who didn't know how to order the type of sandwiches, and it made her very nervous because she was a working class person. And I felt that when I left Cape Breton and I moved to Halifax, I felt that. And what I didn't realize in not going to university after high school, I was always smart. I had a lot of problems because of having to leave my grandparents at one point and go with my mom, who didn't want me, and all kinds of stuff kids should not have to deal with. But yeah, when I left high school, I didn't go to university because I didn't even know how to go to university.
Right.
Okay? How do you begin to go to university? And then I go to Halifax, and I'm like, okay, smart people. University is for smart people. People, whatever. Meanwhile, I went to every used bookstore. I read a lot on my own, philosophy, novels. I was reading and not realizing when I finally went to university after having my kids as an adult that most of the students, they weren't that smart. And, they don't, you have to force them to read, and they're not even reading the material. And it was just such a moment of shock for me that this place that I thought I couldn't enter, and I barred myself from, my own mind forged manacles.
I thank you so much for that, because that's actually very relatable to me. My background is somebody went to university, who hadn't gone to, some people hadn't finished high school, let alone gone to post-secondary in my family. So I love it. And my, actually very similar, any people know me well, and people who don't, I'm happy to share it, is I was raised by my grandmother too. I was raised by my grandparents, my grandmother in particular. And, instilling with, unfortunately, she died 2 Julys ago. Not COVID related, but it's horrible nonetheless, because of the restrictions. And the same thing, I know exactly what you mean about this, trying to navigate. Like I didn't know how to go to university, but when I got there, it was it was so much of a refreshing. It always is, and I still have this element now, talking to people who says, you know what, you've never changed. You've just honed who you always were. You were always somebody who had this ambition, desire. But it was a challenge in the sense that you had to maneuver. I had to figure out for myself, how do I be a student in a university setting? What does it mean? And
what is university?
What is university? Yeah.
Why do people do it? What can I do with it? It's funny. You would think that this is stuff that high school would handle, also finances, and saving for a home, but or being a citizen and voting and stuff like that. But if you don't have the sense of what you can even do with it, or that you belong there, and that it's not like these people aren't all rocket scientists or you can do it. It's really just hard work, Absolutely. And so I tell anybody who is intimidated to go to university, a lot of people, younger people that I know back home, look, I'm not a genius. I just worked really hard, and I graduated summa cum laude at the top of my program. And you know why? As a mature student, because I knew I wanted it, and that's Absolutely. What it takes. That's what it takes. You have to want it.
And on a shout out to you, Terry, and a personal shout out, I first became aware of Terry Newman's work from your writings with Quillette, actually. And I was so taken, and this is I never used the word, so here's the first time using it in any context. A very surreal moment talking with Terry Newman on a podcast, because this is somebody whose writings I very much love. Those questions I really much think are important. They're not just some sort of theory that is appeasing some sort of faculty element, that only faculty understand, and jargon. It's very important, and I'm like, wow, to say that. There is moments where lately I've stepped back and said, like, who I've talked to, but also who wants to talk to me. So yeah, I do get exactly what you mean by this, because there are still moments where I'm not too much anymore. I think the pandemic's kind of helped with me kind of realize my pursuits with the podcast and my academic pursuits and so forth, but realize there are those and it was 2 professors in my university. My first professor, who was he retired several years ago, who said, we became friends, and he said, you're going places. You're going places because you're not thinking like everybody else here. I said, you're not thinking like everybody else. He goes, and where you're sitting, how you come to class, everything. You don't take it for granted. And then somebody who it was the chair head of the department, first the dean, but also the chair head of the department of biology, who said, you're going places. There's a lot of people who write well. You write well, you think well, you're critical. You don't, and you realize the fact that a fact is a fact, but interpretations can be multiple. You're not saying, oh, this is the only way and so wrong, and all those kind of things. And it was refreshing to hear that, because I didn't, as much as I am a steadfast believer in, you have to, don't seek out confirmation and affirmation, believe in yourself. It was very reassuring to hear people who were well at their level telling me that, and who became friends, after during my time, and still who we still have a great rapport with. So
teachers are so important. What you do, and it's not lost on me every time I walk in class or have an interaction with my students. It's so important how you make, what's the saying? Something people never forget, how you make them feel, right?
Yeah.
And that's important. Like it's, you should always encourage ideas and notice when, people are doing something different, and kind of applaud them for adding something new to the conversation. And so many teachers do not do that now, because they're kind of doing like the political stance thing. And I think that.
Absolutely. I mean, and you want to, especially on a primary level, you want to have kids, if they're going down, even if it might be silly, let that silliness unfold. And then see why they're thinking, because they're obviously thinking a particular way about a particular thing, and it might have some really interesting elements to it, or very important elements for themselves. Don't thwart it away and say, oh, that's bad, that's good. You're literally stunting their intellectual growth. You're really doing, I would say pedagogically, but also you're doing damage to them at that age by saying, you just don't do that, that's bad, don't think like that, or don't question that, or whatever the thing might be. No, let them jump in that puddle, let them get dirty, physically get dirty, let them question that, let them engage in that. Every child, as Carl Sagan rightly said, every child is born a scientist, and we nullify that to them.
Oh yes, and that's exactly why I'm saying much earlier on, that needs to be, projects need to be, kids need to be given ideas that they can expand on, and projects like that in class. It would definitely open them up. I had I had quite a few good teachers in my undergrad, and through my experience, and very supportive teachers. I think that probably the professors that helped me the most were philosophy professors, right? And so my philosophy of ethics teacher was brilliant, and I was just like, wow, this is amazing. I love this class, and I learned so much, just the history of ethics.
Absolutely.
And also I took the same teacher for philosophy of science and philosophy of biology, learned about fallacies, and learned about science, and really how to dig deep down into scientific studies. But also, I had, the humility at one point in my undergrad as a mature student, and somebody from the backwoods, to come out and say to him, like, thank you, like, you taught me how to think. Like, you literally taught me how to think. It wasn't that I wasn't smart before. It wasn't that I didn't have insights or have all kinds of experiences that were useful, but you actually taught me how to organize my thoughts. And, and I think, it's just so important to have.
It's a very empowering thing. I mean, people use that word, throw it around willy-nilly, but those things in one's life are very empowering for the individual, very powerful. And for me, my thing was slightly different. I think for both my grandmother and those two professors in my life, and various teachers, various people I've run into, but particularly those three individuals, it wasn't that they allowed me to think, but they gave me the tools for me to believe in myself. Right, I doubted myself to too much of a degree, where I thought, oh, this person might know that, and I very quickly on within my first maybe first 2 semesters disregarded that. And the one thing I find now I frown at, but I also now find it to be so pervasive, more than it was before, and I find it to be so saddening, is so many students who are in their undergrad, who were always doing this before, but I think more so now, don't want to talk. Before the pandemic, when it was still in person, don't want to talk in a seminar. But also have
especially when it gets to a seminar.
yeah,
Right?
have like a disbelief in, like, I mean, I was always the person that said, oh, I don't want to say it, Matthew or so and so, they can speak it better, they know the answer. That's not right. I have a position, sure, okay, I know mine. The purpose of this setup is so I can learn yours. So I know yours. I want to know.
Yeah, and it's also in a seminar is not to kind of parrot the thoughts of the speakers. It's to kind of play with
Exactly.
their ideas, and
Yeah.
it often gets taught so much that in such a way that it's almost as if the students believes they're just supposed to believe what the
Yeah.
theorists say, and really in the seminars it should be quite laid out that you're just playing with ideas here.
Yeah.
And that playfulness is just not encouraged, and so they start to take theory as gospel. And that,
Yeah,
it's like we come back to like the problem with the academy. Yeah, yeah,
kind of a full circle there. Yeah,
yeah. I'm glad we've done this kind of open format,
yeah,
just really relaxed talking thing, because instead of us kind of like trying to drive home specific ideological wars or things that are happening right now, I think it flowed.
yeah. I don't.
Really.
Yeah, I don't. That doesn't float for me. It doesn't, and I'm happily. I don't even use the term. I don't know. I have a sense of liberalism, but I don't. That to me is partyless. Doesn't have any party, and I doesn't mean then that I'm a centrist, because that doesn't. The center can't hold. So I don't know. I the only thing I always say about myself.
I'd throw all that away if I were you.
Yeah,
that's my advice.
Yeah.
My advice is to talk about ideas and policies directly. Yeah. How they affect you, what's happening, and just get rid of the box.
Yeah.
Because it's a way to dehumanize people. It's
right.
a way to create associations. It's never completely true, because you have people and they'll have different, depending on what the topic is. Usually.
Absolutely. And rightly so. And I completely concur with you on this, Darren. And this is how I live my life. I don't want to. I talk policy, I talk about the idea, the concept, and the application of it. I think that's what matters. I don't, because if you're going to say, I don't like this because it's coming from some direction, well, you've limited yourself, and you've limited the potential for any growth of new idea, of anything, so much so where it's, and you're hurting those around you along with yourself.
Yeah.
It's a poor way to construct. I mean, I think my thing is I'm loyal to the pursuit of truth. And I don't say loyal to truth itself. I don't know what necessarily truth is. We're always discovering more, putting the pieces together. So that is what I'm about, is always the pursuit of truth, and loyal to that, because that's what matters. The application of an idea, and we can disseminate an idea. Pieces of it might be good. As you initially said at the top of the podcast, was something we've lost touch with, I think, very much today, is separating the art and the artist. The same person who paints the Picasso might be a bastard, might be a piece of shit. And that's okay. Not that he's a piece of shit, but the work is great. We can accept the Picasso, but the artist is a piece of shit.
We can talk about them separately.
Yeah, exactly. They're separate entities. Once you've created that, I mean, this is very philosophical. Once you've created that thing exists in and of the world itself, separate from the artist. I don't know why we have now gone backwards with that. Well, that was not, that's not, I don't know. I should
really come on another episode with you and talk to you about fandom.
Oh,
so because of my not so much my sociology, but my media studies background, so one of the things I'm really interested in as well is how fans can now control the directions of series, how they and so there's a lot of that going on for those reasons. The I don't like the art, or I want the art to do this, or I want the art to have a moral goal, or so on and so forth. But yeah, if you want to have me back on someday,
absolutely,
I would love to chat about that. Especially, absolutely. I would go right through. Probably, I would start talking about Lost and briefly about Buffy and Star Trek. Well, if that's something you're interested in.
Absolutely.
I think and how now it's manifested from letters to online forums, to Twitter, and how it's actually gotten to the point now where showrunners will actually reveal something that happens in an episode as to appease the fans and what they're going to do in the future.
Right.
So I think there's a lot to be said, and it's connected to this artist problem. The reason why my fellow students in my media studies class wanted to cancel Vonnegut or Yeah.
I completely concur, and I certainly would. That goes without saying. I would be honored to have you on for another episode and another discussion. On a closing note, I think a good question I'd like to pose to you, and you can throw it back at me. I'm happy to answer too. Is what do you think presently, but going forward, in a methodological standpoint, what do you think that needs to be altered, modified, or renewed, perhaps in a sense, within Canadian society, but also within academia, that can allow students of all ages and ranges to engage in this critical thought, to not be pushed into these boxes or pushed into these movements that don't allow them to do this. I don't think it's much just on the academic. It's as much part of society as the academia itself.
Yeah. I think, like I said before, I think it's the tendency of people wanting to have those quick heuristics of I'm in this box politically. This is the field I'm in. This is the habitus, the beliefs that my field has.
Right.
This is the political beliefs that my field has. Instead of much earlier on in high school or CEGEP, learning the ability to spot fallacies, the ability to engage with humility and charity and try to accurately capture what people are saying, and actually just, humanism. And until we, so, I mean, that being taught earlier is one thing. And the second component I said before is the teaching that theory is not gospel, that theory is play. And that when people play with ideas, you have to have the distance to keep them from yourselves. And understand that nobody is advocating anything, and do not then try to bring people into the situation.
Absolutely. No,
yeah. Otherwise, I really, if I had to, like, heterodox exists. Hopefully this activity that I've done with Heterodox Canada, I'll be able to do in the Denver conference, and we have a discussion about using media, because using the television series, The Chair, gives basically, we never ever see the full context of a situation and people's background, and what they do when they go home, and the kind of things that they have to deal with in their life, which makes them likable and and relatable. And it puts these debates in context. And then we're looking at human beings, from a distance, fictionalized characters, but human beings. And then we can enter with compassion into these conversations about the issues that happen on campus. So kudos to Amanda Pete for creating that show. It's, really
it was really good, because I had first time coming into contact with it was through your lecture. So it's a spectacular presentation of it. So I really enjoyed it. And definitely, Terry, we have to have certainly one of many more to come conversation, because I think this is the starting of a regular appearance, I hope, on this podcast. But Terry, I think it's an amazing conversation, and thank you for being a guest on here today.
Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here.
It was an absolute pleasure.
Tomorrow at Heterodox Canada, hopefully.
Absolutely, yeah, I'll be there.